Spacefarer.
What the UFO? I'm here with John Priestland today. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Caleb, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. John is the chairman and founder of an org called uNHidden, with a capital NHI in the middle. uNHidden says on their website they're a not-for-profit foundation led by doctors and clinical psychologists whose mission is to encourage better conversations about UAPs and promote more effective support for people who have had, quote, exceptional experiences. I think this is a wonderful mission. I'm really excited to talk to you. I'm really excited to find out that this org exists. So before we do anything else, I just want to say bravo, great job. You're doing awesome work.
That's wonderful. Thank you for having us. And it's all about great conversations. That's what we're having right now. And so let's give ourselves a bit of applause for having the courage to talk about this tricky topic of UAPs.
Very, very important. And I really like your sort of two-pronged approach here. I'm going to read a little bit more from your website copy. You say your focus is on improving mental health and reducing anxiety and disorientation, referred to as ontological shock, that can arise from encounters or the growing awareness of NHI, non-human intelligence, in case anyone listening didn't know that, but probably everyone does. So key activities of uNHidden include promoting public health strategies, raising awareness about the potential implications of NHI, and advocating for thoughtful, compassionate disclosure policies. Fantastic. Really love this whole job you've set up for yourself. I love the multi-pronged approach, and specifically, I like that you're centering experiencers and you're talking to everybody who's trying to onboard this difficult information. So I guess the first very obvious question is, what prompted you to start this organization?
About 3 years ago, I began to get interested in the topic. I'm a skeptical physicist, and nice physics boys like me are trained for what we're supposed to believe and what we're not supposed to believe. So we believe in relativity and quantum mechanics. We don't believe in ley lines, crystal theory, astrology, or UFOs. But my brother-in-law came round one day and he said, "Hey, John, have you seen these documentaries? They're about these UFOs and they're buzzing these nuclear sites. You should go and take a look." And he's a bright chap. He's a physicist. I thought, okay, can't be right. Watched the phenomenon, read Robert Hastings' book, UFOs and Nukes. And you kind of go, correlation between nuclear sites and UFO sightings. How does that come about? Because if they're, as we're supposed to believe, the planet Venus, Chinese lanterns, swamp gas, how do they know where the nuclear facilities are? Tell me that. Sounds a bit like intelligent control. And when you go down that particular rabbit hole and you're following, I hope, good physics principles, hypothesis, data, analysis, conclusion, rinse and repeat, what you want to do is go and talk to somebody about it, a friend, a colleague, somebody you work with. And that's when I found the wall of stigma and shame that is around this topic. People looked at me, "John, we don't want to talk about that. I didn't realize you were a conspiracy theorist. Are you okay?" Yeah. And I found that a lonely experience and one that I wanted to break out of. But my experience and how it affected me was nothing compared to the people who have exceptional experiences, who see strange things in the sky that they can't explain. And when they go to friends and family seeking help and support, what do they receive? They receive ridicule. They receive rejection. "You didn't see anything. You're a liar." And when they go and seek medical help from their doctor, what do? They get either rejection or they get pushed down a mental illness pathway. They're not mentally ill. They've just seen something unusual, strange that may have frightened them. So the idea of encouraging better conversations, making it easier for people to talk about what they've seen, to receive the help and support they need, the informal support that we all get from our fellow human beings, or the formal support they might need from a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist, that was uNHidden's mission. But the starting point was always very simple. Let's just make it easier to talk about UAPs.
So you've got this 3-part rubric here that we might use as a structure for our conversation. One is supporting people who have had exceptional experiences. 2 is helping to reduce anxiety by encouraging a trusted narrative. I like that idea and I want to explore it more. And 3 is building resilience in public mental health ahead of any possible disclosure. So Does this sound right to you as the structure you proposed?
That's excellent. Let's have a little postscript at the end around physical and physiological health issues to do with UAP encounters, and some work that uNHidden is doing looking forward, and then a report that we've got planned to come out this summer.
Okay, great. So shall we start with supporting people who have had exceptional experiences?
Absolutely.
Great. Yes. How does this work with your org? Do you open your doors to people to report to you and tell you what they're going through, what they saw or felt or talked to?
So I wish we could. I wish uNHidden was an organization that could refer or could consult. What we are here to do is to advocate for better care and support. And it starts with the challenges that experiencers face when they try to access the health system, and indeed the challenges that medical practitioners face when they try and give unbiased and non-judgmental advice. A great example, and a rather sad example, of what happens when you have an exceptional experience is the author, Paul Sinclair, the author of an incredible book called Night People. And in 1997, Paul woke up with 3 deep ash-filled wounds on his back and a recollection of grey creatures around his bed. And he went to the A&E department, the emergency room, and the doctor asked him, what is it that's happened? And Paul writes that he wanted to tell the doctor the truth, but he knew it would make his situation even worse. It was better to let him think he was a liar than to say what really happened and have the words mental illness added to his notes. And how many times is that the case? There's a wonderful organization called Circe in France who are providing frontline support to experiencers, led by a Professor Thomas Rebeyron. And he talks about the secondary trauma. So the primary trauma is the frightening experience in the first place. But the secondary trauma is when the person attempts to share the experience and has the feeling that it's reduced to a mental disorder. So we want to encourage the health system to respond more positively to people who've had exceptional experiences. And so there are 2 things we need to do. The first is we need to get the government and others to recognize that exceptional experiences, UAP encounters, are a legitimate thing. We have US pilots that see them. We have the recognition in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence 2021 report that these are real physical objects. But where governments refuse to acknowledge that that's a real thing, then why would their health services respond and provide that care? And the second thing we need to do is to make it easier for the professional bodies, by which we mean the bodies that regulate psychiatrists and psychologists. So the Royal College of Psychiatrists, as an example, here in the UK. We have clinical psychologists working with uNHidden who say that they're very worried if they were to consult a patient in a non-judgmental way, a patient who'd seen a UAP, and not tell them that this wasn't a real thing, not say this is sleep apnea, this is false memory syndrome, then if there was a peer review by colleagues of that case, they will be criticized, potentially significantly. Let's just go back to those US pilots. Let's go back to Commander Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, who saw the Tic Tac in 2004. Which one of those were they suffering from when the UAP appeared on their gun camera and on their forward-looking infrared radar? Was it sleep apnea? Was it false memory syndrome? You see where I'm going. So we're starting to believe, military pilots, that they've got all the benefit of all that technology. Why don't we believe ordinary people who go to seek medical help, at least in a legitimizing, validating way? Tell me more about what you saw, rather than closing the conversation down and saying we do not believe. All we want is for people to be treated according to their need, and we want them to be listened to and heard.
Pretty reasonable and connected for me there, the problem of getting people to recognize that this is a real thing with the problem of processing it and dealing with our emotions. It is, as you and I discussed offline, a little staggering how resilient the stigma has been. Like it almost feels like when we're in these conversations and we say, oh, there's such a stigma, that just by saying that we're somehow reducing it, but we're not really, or maybe the project of these conversations just gradually helps erode that stigma. But I haven't bumped into a ton of people with great ideas about how we can actually reduce that stigma. And I'm not sure they're out there because it's such a broad, distributed problem. Do you have some thoughts about that? Do you feel like it's better than it was even a few years ago?
Oh, I think there's been a shift, and I think the fact that we can point to things like the TikTok video, the Office of the Director of Intelligence report certainly makes it easier to make the case. Questions like, did you see David Grush testify before Congress under oath? A great starter questions into a conversation. And as with many things in life, Caleb, the one surefire way to fail is not to try. So we are encouraging people to try to have better conversations and to recognize that there are two different concepts around here. There's stigma and there's shame. Let me break those down. So stigma is the thing that society says we disapprove of, that we're going to make it difficult for people to talk about. And in some cases, I'm sure there are very good reasons for things having stigma attached to them. But it's a collective view, a society view. Then there's shame. Shame is what I choose to regard as shaming and choose to feel difficult about talking about. And the point is the choice words. I can choose not to be shamed by talking about UAPs. It's a legitimate physics-based, data-based topic. I choose not to be shamed by it. And then I can go out and have conversations. And I remember I'm a big fan of Liminal Frames, Darren and Nathan's wonderful podcast. And Nathan last May talked about a really intriguing idea. He talked about something called distributed controlled disclosure. And the idea there was that if we just start listening to people and we start hearing their stories, we don't need a governmental announcement about disclosure. It will just come through. But we're closed-minded. First of all, people don't talk about it because they're shamed. And then secondly, they don't listen because of stigma. And he came up with a great example, which was, imagine you live in a village and that village is next to a wood. And people go into that wood and they come out and they say, there's bears in the wood. And provided you listen to them, one villager, two villager, three villagers come out. Before too long, the villagers realize the wood's got bears in it. You don't need an announcement from the mayor. You don't need an announcement from the village elders. And it's so it is with disclosure. If we start listening to people and their testimony, we'll be a lot clearer about what's really going on. And at the same time, those people will be a lot healthier and happier and validated and supported. It's just about listening. We've got to start doing that. And we've got to choose not to be shamed by what is all about this topic.
So is this moving into area number 2 here, helping reduce anxiety by encouraging a trusted narrative? Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by the idea of a trusted narrative and how that applies to this complicated situation we have around UAP?
So I'll just add to my own personal background. It's a curious thing that at the start of a lot of conversations about UAPs, people will say they are or they aren't an experiencer. I'm not an experiencer. I'm greatly enriched, and I think it's been a real gift that people have shared with me their experiences. I think that's a wonderful addition to the richness of my life. But that doesn't mean that I'm not a little anxious around what's going on with the topic. And you go this way, that way, this way, that way. 1 week it's extraterrestrials, then it's ultra-terrestrials, then Mike Masters, time travelers from the future, la, 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 la. And so it goes on. And I think it was last January where various members of Congress were meeting with the Inspector General of the intelligence community. And they came out and Representative Luna was there. And she was asked a question by, maybe it was a Sky News journalists. And the question was, and this was live, I saw 4 o'clock on the news. So Representative Luna, are they ultra-terrestrials? What is an ultra-terrestrial? And you imagine, mother, father, 4-year-old, 5-year-old daughter, mummy, what's an ultra-terrestrial? And the way this topic moves around, how can we rely? We've got Congress with its UAP Disclosure Act. We've got RO with their narrative. We've got David Grush. We've got Burchett. It's all over the place, and that adds to anxiety. You may remember during COVID there was a word coined for it: doom scrolling. People didn't have access to the information about what was going to happen. Their limbic system of anxiety was triggered. What could they do? They could do this, and they could try and find more information. The studies show that that's bad for mental health. And we've got more than a touch of doom scrolling going on in the UAP topic at the moment. We need governments and agencies to come together and to provide a narrative that we can rely upon. There are lots and lots of things we might look back on COVID and criticize our governments for, but I think at the time they did try really hard to make the science available. We had in the UK a committee made up of the leading scientists called SAGE, and it was trying to get the information out there as they knew it in real time. And we need something similar for UAPs. And we know people who are seriously triggered by this, who there's a chap, a guy we know who, when the drone story was underway in the autumn, thought this was a really serious dynamic, really serious sort of alien encounter, and he needed help and support. This is not a victimless issue. Governments need to realize they have a responsibility to their citizens and their people. Tell us what's going on in a way that we can rely on. That's all we are. Tell us so we can rely on it. And at the moment, and the Wall Street Journal article about disinformation really doesn't help. What do we know is true, and what do we not know is true? And I think that's not the right relationship between governments and their citizens. We should be able to rely on what they say.
Yeah, that also points to some sort of staggering media illiteracy. At this point, I maybe we don't need to go too deeply into this, but even if everything that the military brought to the Wall Street Journal there for that report were true, it is still also the case that we have to process these reports from Fravor and Dietrich. We have to process the ODNI report in 21, as you said. We still have to process Barack Obama saying there are objects in the sky that behave in ways we don't understand. So even if the military has been waging a massive disinformation campaign, which maybe they have, I mean, that's not beyond the realm of imagination, there's still also this information that should clearly be within the scope of somebody reporting on UAP. Like if you're going to write a giant bombshell UAP article, then you should at least read UFOs and nukes or something before you do it. You know, it's just see for yourself whether it makes sense that a movable platform could explain all the sightings around nuclear facilities. That seemed laughable to me, and something like a sharper journalist would have caught.
I have a beautiful book by Jacques Vallée. It's called Wonders in the Sky.
Okay.
And it details 500 UAP cases from 1460 BC to 1879. And I was sitting there with this Wall Street Journal stuff coming out going, yes, Yankee Blue, this information. I wonder whether the Egyptians bought into that. Right. How about the Victorians? What about medieval kings and queens? Did they all buy into this Yankee Blue disinformation narrative?
Yeah.
There's probably quite a lot of cases, and there's 248,000 cases in Jacques Vallée's Capella database that he assembled from all sorts of sources, Ministry of Defense and the US. 248,000 cases in the Capella database, which was the BAS ORSAP database. 0.6% of those were correlated with radar and other technological information. So it wasn't just the witness sighting. All of those disinformation, boy, that was a very busy lot of US Navy folk with all that disinformation. Good job. You were really busy.
I early on in this subject, I started bumping into the word ignorance, and I don't love using it because it sounds accusatory, but there is a problem of ignorance here that is part of the stigma. Like if you're a journalist at a major newspaper and you're going to write a big article on this subject, you should at least read the top 5 most important UFO books before you do that, because you don't know the depth of this information, and you don't know what you don't know, more to the point. So you're creating, if the military is feeding you information, you're just reporting what they've told you to say, and you're not giving it the context that you obviously should. And in other places in the world, in all our other scientific areas of inquiry, like physics, as you mentioned before, we have these expectations about what people must know if they're going to talk sensibly about a subject. If you were going to report on a black hole, you would have to understand something about space-time and gravity, or we would laugh you out of the room. Like, you wouldn't be allowed to publish in a major publication, right? But that contextual requirement is missing for the UAP topic, and we need to bring it online somehow.
Too right. Yes, there's a lot to be done, and people need to keep asking themselves, why are they saying that? And go to the underlying sources. And I think, to the credit of various people in the UAP community, particularly a chap called Rob Heatherly, they've gone to the source documents. They've shown that some of the claims, for example, around the Maelstrom incident in 1967 that are in the Wall Street Journal article are not consistent with the documents, including the documents that the Wall Street Journal seems to have come up with. I'm not an expert on that, but credit to those in the UAP community who've done what they should do, of go follow the data, look at the documents, look at the evidence, and it's been a compelling and effective pushback, I think. Well done them.
Cool. Thank you for flagging that. One more thought here that I don't know where it goes, but I can express a desire that I'm having to counter the stigma with a different kind of shame pressure campaign. Like if you were to write or produce some kind of news document about this subject and obviously miss important aspects of the informational landscape, you should suffer shame for that. Like, there should be a reputational cost or some sort of public shaming. And it's hard to bring that from the UAP community because we're such a sort of stark minority of the broad discourse democratically. And I don't really have ideas about how to do that. And I don't want to start fights because I don't think that's particularly useful. When you accuse people of being ignorant, they kind of go to their corners, and then it's hard to make intellectual progress. But at the same time, I do feel like there should be some sort of negative pressure on bad reporting in this area. And I think the media has a special responsibility in this space, whether we like it or not. I also wanted to weave in science a little bit because you were mentioning it. A lot of the framework that you were bringing was about government disclosure and government acceptance or revelation or information. And I've been thinking more in the last year that I would really like to add science to that conversation. I want to see more public funding of science. I want to see more scientists going into the woods with bear detectors and coming back to tell us what their sensors say about the bears, because the more there are stories about that, even if it's, well, we've determined that some of these objects are fuzzy, or some of them may be brown according to our radar data, that would be helpful in developing that trusted narrative you're talking about.
You're really working with my bear example. Thank you. It's doing some
pretty good.
lifting. Copyright Nathan. So
nice
well
job.
Done him.
Well done, Nathan.
I want to draw a distinction between the scientific investigation and the medical support and care. And to make the analogy work just a little bit further, what uNHidden would say is that when the folk come out of the woods having seen the bears, and if they're distressed, they need to be listened to and cared for, and if necessary, treated. And that's not a big part of the UAP narrative. When Carl Nell announced his plan for controlled disclosure at the 2023 Seoul Symposium, there were 4 lines of effort. We had, what do we have? We had government, we had natural science, we had industry, and we had the humanities in terms of anthropology and sociology and philosophy. Nowhere on that list was medicine, health, doctors. And we were delighted to see that when he announced a revised line of a revised controlled disclosure plan at Seoul 2024, there was a 5th line of effort around medicine, care, mental health. And that's excellent. But we think that there is a role for scientific endeavor, and there is a role for care. And let me make this sort of example. If you have a ufologist, if there is such a thing, who meets an experiencer, the ufologist will ask a series of questions to find out what they know, to learn more about the encounter, down to the point, ultimately, what was the color of the badge on the alien's hat in the spacecraft. It will go in that direction. Where uNHidden is, and medical doctors are, is that it will ask the questions to the best benefit of the experiencer. And there are examples where memories are being unearthed, where the doctor will ask a couple of questions and realize it's not in the patient's interest at all to unearth those memories any further, and they will stop. And so there is a path, one way, to find out about the encounter, to learn from a scientific point of view, data. And there is a path, another way, as to how the patient should be best cared for. Both paths are legitimate. We're on the second path, and we think that nothing that is done on either part should cause harm to the patient or the individual, and that should be paramount. Different strategies for data and science and for care and support, and uNHidden is playing a role in the second, and it's not anything like as high up the list of UAP priorities as we think it should be.
That's a great point, and it leads us naturally toward your third big structural target here, building resilience in public mental health ahead of any possible disclosure. Would you like to talk about that more broadly with regard to people who are learning about the possibility of NHI, or is your angle in here to focus on the experiencers and their interface with medical procedures, or both? Or something?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
A little bit of both. And thank you for the lead in. So one of the things to realize, if there is some form of disclosure, is the potential scale of the people who are affected. It's a wonderful book, the AD After Disclosure by Richard M. Dolan and Bryce Zabel. They speculate that between 10 and 30% of the population could be adversely affected, and that then runs into tens, if not hundreds of millions. And we have conversations with people in the UAP community who say, oh, come on, just rip off the Band-Aid. I'm ready for disclosure. And I say two things in response to that. First of all, there is an assumption with it being a Band-Aid that it's a wound. Run that by me again. Oh, come on, just cut my leg off. Don't wait for the anesthetic. Pull my appendix out. Don't wait for any pain relief. We don't know how serious the impact may be, so just be a little bit cautious about that. And what we've been doing is we've been working with a public mental health specialist from a London teaching hospital to try and apply best practice in terms of the development of planning at scale. We've been developing a health needs assessment, which is the terminology for how one should try and analyze this problem. Look at the population, the elements of the population that are likely to be most affected. If you think about the response being sort of like a bell curve, the public health policy approach is to try and shift the average down, so the average person is less well affected, less seriously affected, and particularly tackle the far end, the tail of the people who are most likely to be affected. And when it comes to people affected in the UAP world, it could well be that experiences are going to be amongst those most affected. If you've been gaslighted for 10, 20, 30 years and told what you saw wasn't real, and then suddenly, hey presto, it turns out that it was, that might be pretty negative, and you might be particularly affected. So experiencers might be a group that are at particular risk. Might be that people who are particularly strongly religious in one form or another might be strongly affected. And then there's also a group, frankly, of vulnerable people who will find the adjustment more difficult. So identifying those more at-risk groups, and then a series of strategies and interventions to build resilience and to target resources at those people. All sounds good. However, we have found it really, really difficult for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's very hard to be clear what sort of scenario are we talking about? Are we talking about the discovery of extraterrestrial life billions of miles away, sort of a they're out there scenario, or they're on their way, or they're here? And if they're here, what are their intentions? So the range of possible scenarios is very broad. But our public mental health specialist made one other point. He said that the tools of the public mental health toolkit are not well deployable in a scenario where you can't tell the difference between delusion, between disinformation, and the truth. And his number one tip for building resilience ahead of any possible disclosure, building resilience in terms of public mental health, is stop the disinformation. And that's not a scenario that people who are trying to build public mental health for postpartum depression in women, for example, or vulnerable mental health issues among migrant workers or people who are dislocated from their families, they don't face the challenge of disinformation. So we found it really difficult. We have come up with a mental health needs assessment, which we're consulting on at the moment, but we've got a lot more work to do before we think it's really good to go. However, engaging with organizations like the Royal College of Psychiatrists is very beneficial. And they have a wonderful little phrase which is prevalent in mental health, which is the lived experience. So they talk a lot in mental health about lived experience, and what could be more apposite for experiences than legitimization of their lived experience. So that's something to work on, and a point of commonality between the public mental health professionals and what we're trying to do at uNHidden, lived experience.
Interesting. This also pointed in the direction of the 5 recommendations that come out of uNHidden's really excellent white paper, which I will link and maybe we can discuss, but people should check it out on their own time. Great.
There we go.
What is it called? The impact of
exceptional experiences and disclosure on mental health and well-being.
Excellent. Okay. This is a very highly detailed, highly researched, well-sourced paper that people will enjoy engaging with. It takes it very seriously, and it's a valuable resource. And then the 5 recommendations, am I right in saying that they come out of this paper? Like
very much so. Yes.
Okay. Would you like to talk through them, or would you like me to breeze through the top lines of these 5 ideas?
Why don't you take us through it? And you've already touched on in the way you structured the conversation so far on a number of them, but I can pick up a couple of other threads.
Okay, great. Well, you got me there by saying it would be very helpful, basically, if these mental health professionals had a better understanding of the real situation here. So these recommendations are mostly aimed at the government, but some at professional bodies. You say, and you put this in terms of the UK, but I think these are applicable to any government on planet Earth currently, maybe elsewhere. The UK government should publicly acknowledge that UAP sightings and other forms of exceptional experiences are real, and that the people who have experienced them may need care and support. The National Health Service and professional bodies should develop guidance for health and social care professionals to make it easier for them to consult patients presenting with exceptional experiences in a non-judgmental and evidence-based manner. That's 2. Third is the government should provide credible information about the UAP topic to the public, and the media needs to play its part by reporting newsworthy stories about UAPs fairly and properly. 4, the government should commission multidisciplinary research that considers both the medical and psychological aspects of how the general population might react to UAP disclosure, and identify the most vulnerable individuals, groups, and communities, and what sort of help and support might be beneficial for them. And 5, the government should develop a plan for UAP disclosure that brings together multiple branches of government and community groups as a single, open, shared endeavor, putting people and their well-being first. This needs to be done in a way that builds trust. So would you like to pick up on any of the details here, or finesse any aspect of that as it was written? Do you have different feelings about any of these now since you put them down?
I think as a whole, that presents a credible program, and it's quite hard for governments or anyone else to take issue with it. It's around treating people decently. It's around listening to them and providing support. It's around telling the people what's going on in a trusted way, and bringing groups together to build a plan. So what's not to like about that?
Yeah.
What I will say is, and it's a sort of tangential point, the doctors, I think, are really good at disclosure, and their voice is not heard as much as it could be. Just to say, I'm not a doctor, I'm a physicist, but we have at uNHidden a medical advisory board made up of doctors and clinical psychologists. And why do I say doctors are good at disclosure? Because they have a code of medical ethics, which includes a number of points and principles. They have a duty of care, but they also have a duty of candor, which means they have an obligation to tell patients things that are relevant to the patient and the patient should know. There's also a principle of patient autonomy. So patients need to have the information they need to make informed choices about their treatment and their lives. So let's just apply the duty of candor and the principle of patient autonomy to the UAP topic. Just ask 100 out of 100 doctors if there's a negative cancer test result would agree that the patient should be told. So it would be the case that doctors would advocate that the truth that people needed to know about UAPs should be shared. But here's the second point that I want to make, which is the doctors are also very, very highly trained in the best way to provide that information, with all of the backup, the pharmaceutical backup, the drugs, the psychological backup in terms of the treatment, and the physiological support. So if you have cancer, there's a range of treatments and you've got people to talk to. They don't just send out a text on a Friday night going, cancer test result positive. And so it should be with disclosure. There should be a duty of candor on the agencies, on the authorities, but it shouldn't be disclosure coming out in a random, unkind, uncaring, unthought through way. Carl talks about the need for controlled disclosure. uNHidden goes further, and we argue for a compassionate disclosure, one that puts people's interests and needs at the heart of it, and the way in which we're told and the way in which 8 billion people get from one side of the valley of not knowing about disclosure to the other side of the valley when it's just something we all know about. There are bears in the wood and we're all comfortable with that. That has to be done in the best way. There's too much riding on it, and there must be an infinite number of ways of doing disclosure. uNHidden's advocating for a good one, a really good one, and a one that looks after and looks out for people.
I want to add two nuances to the word disclosure here in this conversation. One of them is sort of a shade on the word government. This happened to me kind of early in my investigation here. I was saying the government a lot, and then I gradually realized that I was talking about the military and the intelligence communities, and that's distinct from the elected bodies of government in both of our countries. In America, we've been going through this process of congressional representatives pushing military and intelligence agencies for more information, and in some cases hitting sort of a stone wall. Like, we could talk about this in a secure environment, but we can't tell you publicly. And then they take representatives into secure environments and they make them sign NDAs. So our public elected representatives, non-disclosure agreements. So our public representatives then can't talk about what they hear from the deeper part of the government. So I just wanted to draw that line. I've been using the phrase military intelligence community as distinct from the government, because I think people get this impression that a secret would be impossible to hold if it were known by the government. And I think that's true, but I also think large parts of our governments don't know very much about this subject. And that leads me to this deeper, sort of more challenging point, which is getting right at the word disclosure. And that's that it seems possible from the outside, at least, not having all the information, that even within the deepest parts of the military intelligence communities or the government aspects, that government agencies that do know things about this subject, they might not have what they would consider a complete picture of the situation. And that challenges this word disclosure, because disclosure almost implies that they know everything and they're just not telling us. And it could well be, I think, that the situation is more complicated than that, and that they know things they're not sharing, but they don't know everything. And I think Wendt and Duval had mentioned this in their excellent work on sovereignty and the UFO and what might disincentivize militaries and governments from sharing that information. One of the potential challenges there is that they might have to tell us that there are some big gaps in their informational structure. And that's not easy to do if you're a military or intelligence operation. So we might be kind of advocating for a partial disclosure, a disclosure of what we know so far, and that, sorry to burden this with more thoughts, but that kind of resonates for me with just the way I try to talk about this as a civilian, which is to say, sometimes you have to hold all these possibilities a little bit loosely. Like maybe we are talking about extraterrestrials, but maybe there's something to the idea of like an extra dimension of time or something. Or hey, maybe ley lines are real, and maybe like the little people have something to do with this. I truly don't know, and I'm at a place where I'm not yet comfortable ruling very much in all the way or out all the way. And I wonder if that might be especially challenging for militaries and governments to confront. And I just was curious if you had any thoughts about that.
I think Alexander Wendt's work is really interesting and important. And he talks now around an autoimmune reaction, a nice medical term, in terms of it may well not be the what the subject of what is being disclosed that we should worry about as much as our reaction to it. And even if what was disclosed turned out not to be fully right, if our reaction to it is negative, then the consequences are still as serious as they might be. But I also think, and maybe this is a controversial view in the UAP topic, but it may go back to my time at the start of my career as a civil servant. So I worked at one point for the Cabinet Office, and the people I worked with, I worked with people who were largely on the civilian side of the civil service, but also overlapping with the military and security people and people in the Ministry of Defence. They were very, very professional, well-intentioned, impressive people trying to do the right thing. And I've got no reason to believe that 25 years on, it's any different to that. The world has changed a lot since 1947, Cold War, and the apparent imminent threat of nuclear destruction. And I think we need to put some of the things that may have been done by way of disclosure in their proper historical context. And we need to look forward. And I think that's part of what the UAP Controlled Disclosure Act, UAP Disclosure Act, is envisaging, that it should be easier for people who now come forward with their information for not to be worried that that's going to be used against them. And I think that's quite important. Otherwise, the UAP community is just going to try and shake a stick at all that's been done. And I strongly suspect that a lot of what's been done has been done in the context and at the time for good reason. And we should recognize that in our response to it.
You're saying that the secrecy maybe had some reasonable reasons behind it, like had some compassion and care behind it. Is that what
I think we need to suspend judgment and at least regard that as a possibility, rather than military bad, UAP disclosure movement good. Life's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah.
What I would say, because I've gone slightly outside my swim lane in that answer, but it's around compassion and empathy, is that uNHidden is very deliberately steering away from the secrets. We're very deliberately not pushing for information around bodies, craft, technology. We're in a different lane, which is around people. Whatever's going on in that world, biologics, David Grush says, all very good. We're interested in caring for people, and that's agnostic to the nature of what's actually disclosed. As I talked about, the left pathway, the ufologist to the color of the alien's hat, we're interested in the right pathway to the people who need care and support, regardless of what's going on in the military intelligence world or whatever secrets come out. People will need care, and we need to build the platform for that.
Great point, and thank you for taking us back to your lane. I had two thoughts here. One that I'll leave dangling kind of is that it occurred to me that the opposite potential of the partial disclosure problem could be true. Like it could be the case that they don't know very much, and that these objects are still sort of inscrutable to our most advanced military science. It could also be the case that they know a huge amount, and that I don't know how to assess these truth claims, but famous lawyer, American lawyer Danny Sheehan has made claims that include like interrogated NHI beings, and if the military spoke to some, non-human creatures 20, 30, 50 years ago and got information about like a galactic club, as our friend Dr. Bolander would say, then maybe they know a lot of information, and that presents a different set of challenges, because bringing all that to light will be complex and difficult, and it doesn't seem like going great so far.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Let me make 2 points to that. First of all, and they're reprises of things I've said already, the importance of a trusted narrative. So you're right. There are various UAP commentators who make all sorts of possible claims around galactic federations and deals and all of that. We need to get ourselves to a position where somebody can tell us things and we can rely on what we're being told. And that is very difficult at the moment, because there's a lot of scary stuff. You can worry yourself a lot if you're so inclined about all the different extremes. So back to the trusted narrative. But secondly, you made a point around they may well not know very much. And that will be quite awkward, because governments are supposed to know a lot. That's what we they keep us safe. And that's partly because they know a lot, including knowing a lot about what's going on in the skies. Back to doctors and medical ethics. It's usually the case that the doctors do not know everything about a patient's condition, and they're still motivated and covered by their medical ethics to tell the patients what they can, what they should, and what helps patients make better decisions, including, if you've only got a few months to live, maybe you'll make different decisions around how you spend your time. So you have a right to know. And I think there are potentially some aspects of this topic just so fundamental around the nature of reality that human beings have a right to know. And that might include a right to know whether or not we're alone in the universe. And that could be something which, philosophically, theologically, psychologically, you just kind of have a sense, duty of candor, patient autonomy, we have a right to know. And I think the governments and the people in possession of that information, we can't expect perfection, and we can't expect completeness, but we can expect consideration of what people have a right to know.
This is such a great point and challenging about doctors. I really liked something you said earlier about how it's often their job to tell you what is or isn't possible. So if somebody presents with an extraordinary experience, a psychiatrist might be incentivized from the body of their work and from their peers to explain to them a level of certainty that might not be warranted by the underlying facts. And one of the challenges of the UAP situation, seems to me, is that it's broadening the horizon of things that might be true. And at least my personal journey for this has been to take a whole bunch of things out of the bucket of no way, this can't possibly be real, and move it to the bucket of, well, maybe. And I wonder if there's some process that you've been thinking about to help medical professionals and doctors move more things from the absolutely not column to the it's possible, we don't know for sure column. And, that could be anything from aliens to fairies, or to, psi phenomena that we maybe don't understand yet. And that seems like a big uphill climb, because academia, and especially the scientific parts of academia, really, as much as they value curiosity, they like the idea also that they have a complete worldview, even though we know that we don't have a complete worldview. If you're interested in physics, you're well aware that we haven't explained it all yet. But there is a tendency to sort of imagine that we've basically got it all. And I wonder if any of your work or any of your thinking has been aimed at just trying to help these professionals open up a little like epistemic humility and
epistemic humility. That's a great one. Yes.
Thank you. Maybe hold a little space for things they are not sure about, or may need to be less sure about than they used to be. What do you think?
Well, I've got a friend who has gone all the way down the rabbit hole and reckons, and I see where she's coming from, it's just easier to believe that it's all true and then come back from that.
That's a good
you
point.
start off by going, well, maybe the correlation with visiting nuclear sites is kind of true. Maybe Robert Hastings is right. And then a few more things might be true. Let's just recognize it's all true and come back from that.
Yeah.
There you go. But you can get yourself in quite anxious about that. So I'm not wholly sure.
Yeah, I think you make a good point that it is easier. It doesn't necessarily make it sort of intellectually preferable from the point of view of pursuing truth, but it is easier.
It's easier. From the medical point of view, we are not requiring or advocating that doctors have a view as to what is true and what is not true around the UAP topic.
Mm-hmm.
What we're advocating is that they should be non-judgmental and put the patient's needs first. And I mentioned earlier in the conversation, Professor Thomas Ribeiro, University of Lorraine, and his excellent CERSE organization. And he has a definition of exceptional experiences, which is why we use the term in our white paper. And it is very broad. And there are 10 examples of exceptional experiences he gives, including things like poltergeist and deja vu. And only one of those is around UAPs. And the reason why they have that definition is because it means that when the patient comes in saying, I need to talk to someone and I need help, they're not pigeonholed in well, you're here to talk about UFOs or UAPs. They're there to talk about whatever they need to talk about in whatever phrase, in whatever frame of reference, and whatever phrases and choice of language they need to. And I think that's all that we need from a medical professional point of view. Stop the sense in which you have to rule this out. Start being more open-minded, less judgmental, and have the conversations that the patient needs. We're not expecting you to tell the patient what they've seen is real, but we ask experiencers what they want as part of our needs assessment. And it's interesting. Typically, they say they want two things. First of all, they want to know what they've seen. And I'm sorry, we can't help you with that. But secondly, they want validation. They want to know that what they're saying is being listened to and respected. It's not the same as being believed. And that's what we're advocating should be more part of the medical practice to this. The patient should be listened to and their needs should be cared for in a non-judgmental way. In the same way, same common sense way, in most of the rest of medical practice. It's a needs-led, patient-centric approach to consultation. And that common sense, that approach applying to people who are saying, I saw something strange in the sky, is what we're looking for. But just as much as if they're saying they've seen something else anomalous, we need to avoid the pigeonholing of the language, and we need the patients to be able to come and tell us what they want in the way they want to.
So this is a good on-ramp to your future as an organization. uNHidden is developing a report on medical symptoms connected with UAP encounters. Would you like to talk a little bit about this and some of your upcoming work in the postscript you mentioned?
So in a similar vein to our white paper on mental health and UAPs, we've been carrying out a literature review on the medical symptoms connected with UAP encounters. So we've gone through some of the principal and famous UAP encounters, Valensol, Cashelandrum. We've written those up effectively as sort of a medical notes perspective. And we've looked at where the literature is on this. And the answer is there is not very much out there on the physical and physiological symptoms. There is an ORSAP report for the Defense Intelligence Agency, written 2009, 2010. It's called Anomalous Acute and Subacute Field Effects of Human Biological Tissues. And it confirms that humans have been found to be injured from exposures to anomalous vehicles, principally due to radio frequency electromagnetic exposure. We've also in our review found other causes of harm to humans, from wounds, from burns, from autoimmune diseases in the literature. That is, this is not primary research. But our argument and reason for going down this route is, first of all, civilian doctors do not know very much about the diagnosis and proper treatment of exposure to UAPs. So if, for example, somebody went into their general practitioner, their primary care doctor, and said, I've seen a blue orb and I've got a sort of strange sunburn on my forearms, the doctor would not know necessarily what to do, would probably think they were dealing with a fantasist who spent too long in a strange position on a sunbed. And we think that it's hard to justify the fact, and this is clearly the case, that doctors and others on the other side of the barrier between civilians and the military industrial side, as you mentioned earlier, doctors on the other side of that know a lot more than civilians. And that means that patients may not be getting the diagnosis and the treatment they deserve. So it is not right that the most definitive book around UAP medicine available to civilians, rather strangely, is Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. There is a lot of information in there about autoimmune conditions, around the impact of physiological and physical of orb encounters. There is no book you can go to in a medical bookshop around UAP medicine. And the work that we're doing certainly isn't that, but it is a start. It is saying we're assembling the data that we've got that's publicly available, and then we're putting a plea out. Let's do more research, but let's also find and assemble the information that's not yet available to civilians and bring that across so doctors can give the diagnosis and the support that is needed. And there can be proper pathways of support and care for people who are affected. And clearly some people are. The specialist reports say that it's undoubtedly the case that humans are harmed by UAP encounters. And once again, people need care and support, in this case, physical and physiological, in addition to the psychological that we've already talked about.
It occurred to me that even opening up the category of this kind of experience in medical encounters is going to ultimately result in data that can be very useful for the conversation. So by giving doctors a box to tick that says UAP encounter or something, we'll be able to
giving experiences a channel which says, I'm not just going to tell you about what I saw, the color of the alien's hat. I'm going to tell you about its effect on me. I mentioned the 248,000 cases in the Capella database that Jacques Vallée put together for ORSAP. It's something like 0.5% of those cases had a physiological effect on the experiencer. So that's a large number of people. So yes, and we think that it also is a wake-up call for policymakers. At the moment, they go, well, UAPs, it's a national security issue. Oh, and it's a flight safety issue as well. But yes, and it's also a health issue for your citizens and your people. And we want to see more scrutiny and more challenge, more questions to the health policymakers, Robert Kennedy Jr. and HHS, questions to NIH, questions to the Surgeon General, and people who are responsible for health policy at state level. They should be aware that there are health issues connected with UAPs. And it will be interesting as and when, and we hope they will, the journalists start asking them questions, as well as the questions directed to the Pentagon and to Congress.
Yeah, it occurred to me that lobbying is an important way in which that works, at least in America. I would imagine that's a pretty prominent part of UK politics too. I'm very grateful to find out that your org exists. I'm very moved by your work, which I think is deeply compassionate and intellectually careful. I think you're doing a great job being thoughtful and kind. And I'm grateful for your time today, and I'm sensitive to it. So I just want to ask, is there anything that emerged from this conversation that you'd like to return to and highlight, or anything that you want to make sure that people walk away from our chat getting with a focus that they can carry forward?
Well, I'm very grateful to you, Caleb, for having me on. I've enjoyed the conversation. What can people do to help? Well, they can come and follow uNHidden on Twitter, handle uNHidden Health, follow us on LinkedIn. They can write to their elected representatives around the health aspects of the topic. But the number one thing they can do, as I was saying earlier, is dial down that thing that's restraining them in terms of that personal shame. They can take a decision, I'm not going to be shamed by this, and they can take another decision, which is they're going to have a go. and having conversations with their friends and family. Choose a sensible, comfortable time when everybody's relaxed, and ask the people around you something to do with UAPs. Have you seen those reports around flight safety issues in UAPs? Did you see that hearing where that David Grush was talking? Have a go. Start conversations, build from the bottom up. And who knows, before too long, Caleb, we might all realize that there's bears in the woods. I got back there. Well done.
Brought it back around. Great comedic landing. Thank you so much for your time today, John. It was a genuine pleasure getting to know you, and I hope we can keep in touch as information in this field develops.
Thank you, Caleb. All the very best to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And that's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening or watching. If you like WTUFO and you want it to keep existing, support us at patreon.com/WTUFO or on YouTube or on Buzzsprout for as little as you want per month. Patreon or YouTube or Buzzsprout, this show is brought to you by you. So thank you very much for your support. I hope you keep listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.